Welcome to Simply by DealHQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of Simply by DealHQ Partners. My name is Precious Ossi, and I am an associate at DealHQ. And once again, happy Privacy Week to all data subjects. And by that, we mean you, I, and everyone. So the just concluded Data Privacy Week of 2025 was thoughtfully themed Fostering Trust and Inclusion Through Data Privacy. And as data subjects ourselves, we recognize the importance of this global initiative. On today's episode, we will be exploring the theme even further as we delve into discovering the intersection of technology, society, and ethics as it relates to data privacy and protection. We will be discussing a critical issue that affects all of us, and that is data privacy. So, as our lives become increasingly digital, concerns about data protection and inclusion continues to grow. So together today, we will explore how fostering trust and inclusion through data privacy can create a more equitable digital landscape. We will explore, among other themes, the current state of data privacy and its implication for individuals and society. We would explore the intersection of data privacy and inclusion, including issues of bias, discrimination, and access. And we would be exploring strategies for fostering trust and inclusion through data privacy, including transparency, accountability, and community engagement. Joining me today are our guests, Mr. Izuchukwu Ubadinma and Kofoworola Ayoola. Mr. Izu is a partner at DealHQ Partners, the supervising partner of our Technovation team, and an expert in data privacy matters. And Kofo is a member of the Technovation team of DealHQ Partners. Thank you, Mr. Izu, and thank you, Kofo, for agreeing to join us today. Now let's go straight into the business. Okay, so let's go straight into the business of the day. All right, so Mr. Izu, my first question is for you. In today's digital landscape, data privacy has become a cornerstone of trust between individuals and businesses, including the government. How would you define data privacy in the modern world, and why is it essential not only for protecting individual rights, but also for fostering trust and inclusion across society?
All right. Thank you so much, Precious, and thank you all our listeners, and happy Privacy Week to everyone listening. So, to your question, simply put, data privacy, refers to the rights a data subject has, that is individuals, the right they have to the control of how their personal information is processed. And by being processed, we mean how those data are collected, how they are used eventually, how they are shared with third parties, whether with or without their consent, and how those data are eventually stored. So that basically speaks to what data privacy is all about. And in today's world, it has become a very critical, part of every business, every activity, because we are basically in a digital world. And with regards to why it matters, consider your data as your private asset. As a matter of fact, it is actually beyond asset, the same way you have your personal belongings, your cars, the key to your home, and other personal items you have. Look at your data in the same light, and even more. So there is need for issues of trust, ensuring that those data are properly handled. That is why it really matters. And so the process of handling this data must be done in a manner that individual trust will be held in some, individual trust can be achieved. This is basically to avoid certain things like identity theft, exploitations, and even commission of financial fraud by the use of those data by third parties. So it is really important that whoever that is processing people's data, take note of these things to ensure that they have the trust of the data subject at the end of the day.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Izu, for that response. All right, so a 2023 Cisco survey revealed that 81% of consumers believe the way a company handles their personal data is a direct reflection of its trustworthiness. Yet, in recent years, high-profile data breaches, unauthorized data sharing, and privacy scandals have severely eroded public trust in both corporations and even the government. So, given this growing trust deficit, how can organizations go beyond legal compliance to actively rebuild trust with their users? What practical steps do you think businesses should take to ensure there's transparency, user control, and ethical data governance while still leveraging data for innovation and growth?
Okay, yes, that's a very important question. And of course, I know that the term business must have been used in a loose term to also include even organizations that may not be into business as it were, schools, churches, mosques, every institution, as a matter of fact, that collects people's data, that, processes data, the data of data subjects. So some of the practical steps that organizations, businesses, and all of them can take in order to ensure trust and inclusion, and not just mere legal compliance, because a lot of times organizations can comply with the requirements of the law, the legal requirements, but we are in a living society. Many times certain things are actually ahead of the law, ahead of the legal requirements. So you see that even though one may have complied with the legal requirements, there could still be means that such things that the law tried to protect are still breached, even outside, even when compliance has been met. So many times people comply with the minimum requirements, and there is still deficits in compliance, or rather in protecting people's data in the context of what we're discussing. So beyond legal compliance, there are many other things, practical steps that businesses, organizations, and institutions can still take to ensure that people's data are well protected and that trust is rebuilt beyond legal compliance. And one of them will be transparency. In as much as you are meeting with a legal requirement, there is also need for you to clearly communicate, how you actually comply with the requirements of the law, so that whoever is accessing your platform, whoever that is coming within your purview, whose data you collect, they will be able to be on the same page with you, in the sense that your platform is, for example, user-friendly. They in your trying to comply with the requirements of the law, you are also ensuring that people who come to your platform, there is enough transparency, and this includes making it user-friendly for them. And this will also include, for instance, in Nigeria, where we have a whole lot of people that are not literate, let alone being digitally literate. You have to create platforms through which they can easily get the communications passed across to them, either through symbols that are very clear, or even through other languages, local languages that they can understand. This enhances transparency. So it's not enough for you to put out the information there in English language that a great percentage of Nigerians, for instance, may not understand or appreciate. And even people that read and write may still not appreciate it, especially when you use jargons in the industry. You need to break it down to the level that people can understand. It enhances transparency. 2, user control. You need to, give access to people that uses your platform or who comes within your platform options, on how to personally manage their data that they have already given to you. And by managing their data in this context, we mean ability to, without so much restraint, ability to edit their data, withdraw consent, and all of those other things they may have supplied to you without so much hassles. And then, of course, there is what we call ethical data governance. It is expected that data processors, that is organizations and institutions that process people data, they should be able to have internally, and this is actually part of the requirements of the NDPR, that is Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, that organizations should have DPOs, data protection officers. So beyond having DPOs, you can actually have a committee. A DPO is simply one individual. You may have more than one, but the minimum requirement is one. Once you meet that requirement, you've actually complied with the requirements of the law. But human, being fragile beings can actually get exhausted at times. There could be oversights and all of that. You can decide to set up a committee of DPOs internally who will be able to together review some of these things to ensure that the organization is not just complying with the basic requirements, but it also taking additional steps to ensure that there is ethical, that there is ethical data governance in the operations of and in the handling of the data of individuals, and then engage communities. There are some disadvantaged communities that may not understand this within us. You can engage them through various means to ensure that they understand all the processes and all of that. Conduct survey periodically, not just for the purposes of having data, but conduct survey to really understand the pulse of the people out there, that's whose data you've actually been using, to feel how they, to understand how they feel about how their data is being processed and all of that. If you go to the social media, you will see a whole lot of outcry from different quarters on how people's data has been mismanaged and all of that. Some of these can actually be avoided if some of these practical steps are adopted. Some of those issues can be limited to a very great extent. So I believe that if some of these steps are taken, the trust in the handling of people's data can be well rebuilt beyond the legal compliance requirements.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Izu. Kofo, would you have anything to add to that question?
Yes, thank you very much, Precious. So for me, I would like to add to what Mr. Ezu said about transparency is actually very, and for me, I think one way organizations can foster transparency is even boils down to something as simple as their privacy policy. There's a requirement in relevant regulations. I mean, for the NDPR, which states outlines the things that should be on a privacy policy or a privacy notice. And in one of the things that should be on the privacy policy is the how information is being, how information is obtained from data subject and what it will be used for, third parties that personal information is being shared with. You find that most organizations don't, even comply with this outline that the NDPR says organizations should model their privacy policy against. So for me, I feel like if you have a compliant privacy policy, you are one step further. You are one step ahead of ensuring transparency. Then I would also like to add that for ethical data governance, one practical measure organizations can put in place to achieve this is putting in place internal access control. So only people who need to access information within your organization should have access. So so you should put maybe like, okay, access. If you have like a database of personal data, only people who need to use that information at that point in time should have, let's say, passcodes. If you have units within your organization, let's say, for example, employee data now, only the HR department or maybe management top level who needs to, have access to such information, should be given access codes to such particular database of, your employees. Then I think another thing I would like to mention, just to add to what Mr. Izu said, is user control. For example, on your app, some apps have privacy control panels. So it's sort of like give users the right, power, the control over the level of information that can be accessed by other users on the platform, or maybe even the service provider. So, for example, you can implement the use of toggles in your app. So, okay, let's say this particular information, my profile picture should only be seen by this number of people or this category of persons. My let's say my email address or whatever information that the app requires should only be accessed by this particular person. So that is another measure that can be implement that can be put in place by organizations. And this kind of, I think it's just all about empowering users, actually, data subjects, giving them control over their data. And when they have that level of control, so they are rest assured that, okay, these people, I can trust them, because I have control over my data. So yeah, I think that's just what I have to add to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much, Mr. Izu. Thank you, Kofo. All right, so moving on to the next question. In developing economies, digital literacy is low, and people often share their personal data without even understanding the risk of doing so. Meanwhile, big technology companies collect and monetize this data without clear safeguards. So how can policymakers and companies ensure that data privacy protection do not further marginalize vulnerable communities, but instead foster greater inclusion?
This will have to involve a lot of stakeholders, and definitely beginning with the regulators, the policymakers and the regulators alike. And by the stakeholders in the Nigerian context, for example, this will be the NDPC, the Nigerian Data Protection Commission, of course, the lawmakers themselves. Of course, lawmakers ordinarily would make the laws except if certain other stakeholders identify these challenges and then take it to them for amendment of whatever existing law to have these things reflected. And the regulators too can actually leverage on some of the provisions of the law to expand on them and to have these things enforced, which already we have sufficiency of. So the NDPR, for instance, and the NDPC, through their regulation, the NDPR, they can have that regulation well strengthened out and not just having the force of the law that is lying dormant. They should also ensure high level of compliance are adhered to by organizations, by companies. They should find a way to, have their task force go to and periodically not just have organizations audited and it ends at that point, audited by DPCOs and it ends at that point. They should also find a way to go and implement, ensure that the audits that has already been done are properly done and also implemented. What this means is that periodically they can just go and randomly visit organizations and see how they are actually implementing what has been put on the books, either on their own books, on their websites, and all of those. Because many times these things are out there in the public, but internally they may not exactly have been implemented. So enforcement measures should be carried out by the regulators and other policymakers. And then there has to be some form of, campaigns on digital literacy. In Nigeria, for example, a whole lot of people on the primary basis are not literate enough. Then on top of that, you have digital literacy, which is what we're talking about. So you will see that number, that percentage of non-literate persons, goes higher again. So there has to be, a kind of form of campaign to give people. This may be done through government agencies and NGOs. In fact, I will advocate for NGOs, especially within our own context, because many times governmental institutions are usually, the trust level placed on them, whether rightly or wrongly, is low. People tend to trust NGOs more. And there might be one or two reasons for that, one of which is NGOs are not coming to collect your money, for example. They are not coming to tax you. But people feel that whenever you are interfacing with the government, they are looking to find faults with you or tax you and all of that. But once the government and other regulators partner with NGOs and non-government organizations, non-profit organizations, once they partner with them and carry out some level of campaign to give people the adequate literacy regarding better handling and all of that, digital literacy, this information can further be driven down even to the people in the rural communities. Even in Nigeria, for example, we have hundreds of languages and all that. We can start with the major languages and communicate this thing down to the grassroots and all of that, because by the time things become very effective if they have gone beyond the social media down to the rural people. So there has to be that level of campaign to educate people adequately with regards to the risk around data privacy and the rights they also have. And then there has to be some form of architecture designed in the areas of data inclusion. That is how data is collected, how data is generally processed and all of that. There has to be some level of inclusivity to ensure that people at every level, at every cadre, without bias to people's religion, without bias to people's background, their level of income, or even gender, that there is no such bias against people in terms of handling of their data or in terms of management of their data by themselves or by the organization. So things like visual aids can actually be provided. I don't know how many organizations that have that on their website, for example, visual aids for those that are challenged with sites, and even voice-based interfaces and all of that. So you can have all of that provided in multiple languages, for instance, on the websites, on every publications that are made by, data handlers and all of that. So the outcome of this will ensure that people's data are adequately protected and there is no, we don't have so much marginalization against various groups of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Izu. I think I very much agree with the NGO partnership points, because we can never underestimate the place of training and awareness and all of that. And people really do not know the rights that they have. Artificial intelligence thrives on vast amounts of data, but the quality and diversity of that data determines whether the AI-driven decision promotes fairness or perpetuates bias. Now, studies have shown that bias training can lead to discriminatory outcomes in hiring, lending, law enforcement, and even healthcare. And this will disproportionately affect marginalized communities. Both the government and other regulatory bodies are now calling for greater transparency and ethical AI practices. And then businesses must navigate these challenges of leveraging AI for efficiency without compromising fairness and inclusion. So given the risk generally associated with biased artificial intelligence models, what concrete steps can organizations take to ensure that AI-driven decisions promote fairness, transparency, and inclusion, rather than deepening existing inequalities? So how can businesses, regulators, and technologists work together to mitigate bias and build ethical AI systems?
This is a very interesting question. I'm going to start this way by saying that generally AI doesn't necessarily have a mind of its own. AI run on data, just as you rightly mentioned, on vast amounts of data. And these data are what has been supplied to it through different sources. It collates this data from different sources. The trainers supply it with all of this data. And these data themselves have been, provided by humans who have emotions, who may have their own biases and all of that. And we will all agree that in Nigeria, we already have a high level of bias in various with regards to various issues, whether from religion to ethnicity to gender to social status, and all of that. We have a whole lot of bias. It is in every community, in every society, rather, but we seem to have a handful already in our society here in Nigeria. So if the data, some of which are highly biased, are now used to train these AI tools, are used to train, are used to develop platforms through which people's data are collected, used, transferred, or stored. If those skewed data, by reason of their being biased, are now used, of course, you will know that at the end of the day, there is going to be biased outcome, by the use of those models, AI models, for example. So some of the concrete steps that can be used to ensure some level of fairness. We may not have 100% accuracy, as should be some high level of fairness. So to regularly, as periodically ensure that these AI, the tools are trained with diverse data sets that from the diverse population, for example, in Nigeria, from different background, without necessarily using a data from one segment. The thing is that a whole lot of time, researchers may want to conduct a research that ought to have a, a nationalistic view, but it may end up being a regional view. They may, on account of insecurity, for example, decide not to go to some areas of the country to conduct research or collate data. They will just restrict themselves to certain areas in the within the country, for instance. And at the end of the day, this information, which is in itself not accurate, having not captured a certain region, will not be used to develop something. Maybe, of course, when these research are conducted, they are sold to big tech companies for them to help in supporting big businesses like banks and all of that. By the time they use this information, you will realize that a huge segment of the population of the country or the society has already been, ignored, discounted. So at the end of the day, they are being marginalized. So ensuring that the trainings, the researches, or whatever that is done in order to develop these tools are sourced from the diverse population, not just the population in itself, even down to other minority groups, down to various ethnic groups and all of that in the rural areas, even within the urban demographics. Then, there has to be some kind of regular audits. We cannot overemphasize on the need for regular audits. It has to be done regularly to determine whether what AI tools, what platforms have been built or trained with discriminatory, outcome and with discriminatory data and all of that. And once these things are found, the algorithms should be adjusted in accordance with the findings. And then transparency, because you will find that almost in all of the questions that you may ask, you must always find the issue of transparency reoccurring again, because it is one of the, you speak about data privacy. Transparency is one issue that also must be one step that must be taken. And in this sense, this transparency here speaks to, organizations or developers of these AI systems and all that, publishing reports on how the tools were developed, how they were validated, and how they take accountability into question. So that is one thing that must be done. And beyond this, there has to be some level of collaboration. The collaboration has to cut across different stakeholders in the data privacy industry, as it were. This will include the regulators, the businesses that process people, or organizations that process people's data, and even the tech guys, whether as individuals or organizations, should be able to work together to develop and establish guidelines that is tailored to, for example, the Nigerian context and that of Africa as a whole, whoever that will be listening to this podcast from wherever, to ensure that these things are developed in a way that it will enhance credibility within their own society. So, for instance, if we're to, give an example. For example, a Nigerian fintech company can use an AI to assess credit worthiness, but there has to be an assurance that the algorithm does not unfairly disadvantage women, because in our society, for example, it is believed that men can hustle more to pay, if I use that word, can hustle more to pay for loans and all of that, that women may not be able to take risk in paying. That may be false at the end of the day. So algorithms that are used, we must ensure that they are not skilled, they are not used in such a way that it affects the rights of women and younger persons or people in the rural areas to access loans, for example, from banks. Thank you so much, Precious.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Izuchukwu, for that wonderful explanation. All right, so I'll be moving on to the next question. With organizations collecting and processing vast amounts of personal data, regular audits have become essential for ensuring compliance, accuracy, and ethical data practices. A well-conducted audit helps identify inconsistencies, biases, vulnerabilities, and also ensures that data-driven systems operate fairly and transparently. Now, without proper oversight, businesses risk unintended discrimination, security breaches, and loss of consumer trust. How can organizations implement a robust data audit process to enhance transparency, accountability, and inclusion? What key factors should be assessed to ensure that data practices align with ethical standards and regulatory requirements while fostering public trust?
Okay. Yes, somehow we have slightly mentioned this, and it is important that this question is asked as a standalone so that it can be properly dimensioned. Now, some of the key factors that must be considered when audit is being conducted, and by the way, this audit is something that is conducted every year within the Nigerian context, but it is also advised that internally organizations do not need to wait for that yearly cycle in order to conduct the mandatory and regulatory required the regulatory mandated audits itself. They can take out, maybe they can, depending on how much data they process and all of that, they can say, okay, organizations can decide amongst themselves and say, okay, every quarter or half yearly, we will conduct maybe a mid-level or low-level kind of an audit ahead of the yearly mandatory audit, data audits requirements. So in doing this, whether it is the mandatorily required audits or the self-imposed audit cycle for organizations, they will first of all have to ensure that whatever data they are using to conduct this audit in itself is correct, is accurate, and up to date. Because organizations have a risk to replicate things without probably editing, that is copying and pasting without editing adequately, since this is something that is done every now and then. For some persons it may sound that it is now it has become boring because you keep doing the same thing every year. But no, what you have to do is to ensure between the last audit that has been conducted and the next one, it is a long period of 12 months or thereabouts. You ensure that whatever data you've used between then and now is accurate, has been updated. Chances that it will be the same set of data is very low, very, very low, because as you're dealing with people, new people come into your system, old people exit and all of that. So when people exit, have you destroyed the data depending on the required level timeline for storing them? So you need to update your data. You need to ensure that there is accuracy in the data you are using. Secondly, like we had mentioned with regards to issues of bias, it is during the audit process that you also have to use mechanisms that you must have set in place, and or that your DPCOs deploy. You use those mechanisms to try to dictate every element of bias, and then try to address them. Bias in itself is not wrong. It is something we see everywhere. Just as human faces are different, so are their perspective, feelings, and emotions different. And data run on these things, on people's emotion, perspectives, and all of that. So once you have used, a a neutral system, a neutral standard guidelines, you use those things to dictate whether there are some elements of bias with regards to the data you're using to conduct your audit, or you've used in conducting your audit in the last time. Once you identify, yes, there is some level of bias in the data set we've used, you find way to address them immediately and implement them. This can run through the whole process, either in the collection of your data, in how you've used those data, how you have even transferred it. If you have seen that certain group of persons are marginalized, find a way to address those. And then very important critical element with regards to data privacy, it's security. So this is one factor that you must always look out for. What are the possible ways that this data that we have during your audit, this is what you look out for? What are the possible ways that this data we have can be, breached, can be, tampered with, and all of that? Look for that. Organizations hire ethical hackers in order to do things like this. They try to ensure that, to a very great extent, the data they have, where they have stored it, is somehow security proof. Once you are able to find these vulnerabilities within your organizations, you quickly address them before someone else, a third party, finds out. And it becomes a huge issue. And the trust level will, of course, drop once these issues are found out by third parties. But if you find the security gaps within your organization, from within your organizations, you will be able to address them quickly before it becomes a problem. And then compliance. Ensure that whatever you do, however you do them, that you're still within the requirements of the law, you're still complying and adhering to the relevant regulations, and in our own case in Nigeria, the NDPR. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Kofo, can you now help us elaborate more on data audits? What is the importance of data audits, and how does this help in ensuring data privacy and trust? How should organizations conduct effective data audits? What does it generally entail, and what are some common challenges and best practices in this area?
Okay, thank you very much, Precious, for your question. So, it's just, flowing from what Mr. Izu has said, one key importance of conducting regular data audits is, one, is to identify vulnerabilities within your organization, within how, as an organization, you handle people's data, in how you process people's data, basically. So when you subject your data processing or data handling practices to an audit process, it helps you to identify loopholes, helps you to identify ways or areas you need to reinforce, so that you prevent breaches, prevent exposing your customers' data to hackers or people with malicious intent. For example, if you can have, let's say, an employee within your organization who is a fraudster, and who intends to do something, maybe defraud a customer. You can have people like that within your organization. So, for example, an audit process can help you determine whether you need to improve or increase your access control measures, right? So, an audit process just basically helps you to identify loopholes, identify areas you can reinforce to protect people's data within your control. Then another thing that an audit process would help you to do is to help you comply with relevant laws, relevant data protection laws. I'm very sure we are all aware of the recent organizations, the big tech companies that NDPC fined recently. That's Meta, and then also another bank in Nigeria for the violation of data protection regulation. So it's very, very important to conduct the data audit. The data audit will help your organization stay compliant with with data protection laws. Then another thing a data audit would help you achieve is to maintain customers' trust, just like I said. So imagine, a situation where there's a breach, or let's say external people, hack into your systems, and then they leak out, let's say, your customers' financial information, or maybe health data, health information, and then it's all there in the public, and then people are embarrassed, people are being targeted, and then there's a feeling that comes with that. People will no longer trust your organization. People will no longer, want to do business with you. So your business like suffers and all that. And before you regain that reputation, it actually take a lot of time for people to trust your organization again. I think one major example is this fintech, loan apps that post people's information outside there. I mean, if you would want to engage, want to do a business with, want to benefit from the financial services of those kind of companies, you'd have to think twice, because you just be like, I don't think I want to do anything with these people. So it's very, very important. It's important to do an audit process to help you avoid all that. So yes, and to also help to optimize your data management. So it helps you put in structures within your organization on how to handle data. Yes, so I think yes, those are the importance of conducting regular audits. So, and I've also mentioned that it would, if you do an audit, it would promote trust. People, your customers will trust you. So, one key thing in conducting an effective data audit is to contract a data compliance organization, data protection compliance organization, that is that expertise. I know there are a lot of DPCOs outside there to offer data audit services, but it is very, very important to engage one that has experts, one with experienced professionals who can walk you through the process, and then help you to identify loopholes and vulnerabilities that your organization might have internally. So that is the very first step in conducting an effective data audit. That is very, very important. So what does an audit entail? Just like we said, and just like Mr. Izu has said, a data audit basically entails, an analysis basically of all your internal policies concerning handling of data. So that's what an audit entails, and it would involve, reviewing how you share data with third parties. Let's say if you share data with outsiders, with external organizations, how you process people's data, who you share them with, what kind of data you receive, and in fact, whether you even take people's data with their consent or not. So an audit process, examines all that area. Then I think one of the key challenges in conducting effective data audits is the affordability challenge. I know, most organizations, I mean, data audits, is something that every organization should do if you interface with people's data. It's very, very important. So affordability is one key challenge that people have. So people don't want to, for organizations who, for example, for most startups, they don't do it now because, let's say, they're still bootstrapping, or they don't have the finance or the funds to actually do that. So they are actually running their businesses, right? But you find that they don't factor in conducting data audits into their operations for now, because they just say that, I don't have money for that yet. So I think funding or finance is a very key challenge, affordability. So yes, that's what I have to say on that. So best practices in the area would be to, just like I've said, number one, engage experienced professionals, and then another thing is implementation. It is very, very important. When the data audit process, when a data audit is conducted, at the end of the audit process, you have an audit report prepared by the engaged DPCO, and that audit report is filed, if there are recommendations that DPCO would make for your organization, best practice for your organizations to implement, at the end of the day, the audit report is filed with the NDPC, and then you also get a copy for yourself. And in the copy, you have recommendations, a list of recommendations that the DPCO would, give to you. And it shouldn't end at that. So one key, best practice for you is to ensure that the recommended best practices should be implemented by your organization. Just like Mr. Izu said, it shouldn't be that at the end of one audit cycle, you have a particular just a pool of information that you supply. Then when the next audit cycle comes, you then repeat that information. Your organization should make sure that it is tracking. Your organization should make sure that it is tracking its processes between one audit cycle to the other, so that when the next audit cycle comes, you'll be able to identify new challenges coming up within your organization. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kofo, for that insightful answer. All right, so I'll be moving on to our final question for Mr. Izuchukwu. With growing concerns over data security and user privacy, emerging technologies such as blockchain, zero knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryptions, and decentralized identifying systems are reshaping the way personal data is stored, shared, and protected. Now, these innovations have the potential to reduce reliance on centralized data repositories, minimizing the risk of data breaches and unauthorized access. So how can these emerging technologies like the blockchain, the zero knowledge proof we already mentioned, how can they redefine the future of data privacy? And also, what challenges and opportunities do they present for businesses, organizations, and the government? And how can these businesses proactively adapt to these opportunities to ensure trust, transparency, and inclusion?
First, we have to give some basic level of understanding on what some of these terms in the question mean, because this is a very important question. For some of these things, a lot of persons have come across them, but not knowing exactly that this is what they mean or to what extent they can exercise their rights over some of these. So when we speak to blockchain, this is basically a tamper-proof recording of data and transactions, as it were, in such a way that there is some high level of transparency, security, so much so that the person on the other end may not be able to even alter the information you are providing at all without you doing it yourself. An example is when you are doing transactions, maybe cryptocurrency transactions, for example, it runs on blockchain and all of that. So the security, once you lose your, for example, login details as an individual, is almost over, as it were. So one key factor here is that the information system is so much decentralized. There is no central system of storing the data, as it were, just like you may have with the traditional banking system. Then when you talk about ZKPs, that's zero knowledge proofs and all of that, it is a method where you will be able to prove certain statements or certain data about yourself without necessarily revealing the true details. A common example is where you have lost your password, you can't remember your password, and so as a result of that, you've made several attempts to log into your banking app and you got blocked since there was no authorized access, as it were. You call your bank over the phone and they begin to ask you, since themselves do not know your password, as it were, but they have other data of yours and have the ability to unlock your account. They'll begin to ask you questions around your account without you necessarily revealing other basic details. They can ask you questions about your date of birth, ask you questions about the last transactions you had on the account, the time you opened the account, and some of the information without necessarily you divulging the other basic questions. And then when you talk about decentralized identity system, which works more like zero ZKPs also, it is a way that you are able to, control your personal identity through other system, through a non-centralized system. So organizations you interface with, they do not have control, or even if they have control over those data, you yourself, you can also have control, ability to manage your data without relying on that centralized system. So this is basically what some of these terms mean. But to some extent, even while these opportunities and while this infrastructure seems to be out there, or there are things that are already known, yet there are good opportunities, but there are still challenges with regards to their use, some of which we have in one place or the other highlighted. And one of the major challenge is the literacy level. You get a whole lot of people in Nigeria scammed because they do not know what some of these terms mean or how they work and all of that. Somebody gets called by a random person to provide so details that may be out there in the public, and they begin to, divulge other secret questions they do not need to provide to third parties and all of that. So the literacy level has to be enhanced, and all the stakeholders in the data protection service industry have to key into this. Big tech companies, businesses, and the likes, NGOs, even down to schools, they have to educate people as much as possible. And government organizations, we have, for example, in Nigeria, the National Orientation Agency, for instance, they need to also step in and do a whole lot of campaign around this to educate people on some of these things and give people real example that when you see this is actually what it means. With that, people will easily connect to this technology. They may not know all the technical aspect, but they will be able to know how to respond to them based on the level of education that's they would have received. Then the infrastructure system itself in Nigeria and in many other third world countries, the access to internet infrastructure is highly limited. So, and digital services run on internet, on that infrastructure. So it's this inadequacy of infrastructure development in this area goes a long way to hinder the adoption of the system. You will see a whole lot of people, they will tell you that they don't do internet banking. They will tell you that tomorrow when they want to do internet, deal with the banks and all of that there won't be internet, and they will be frustrated. They may have relied on that thinking, so they will rather zero their mind off that and concentrate on their old and traditional ways of transacting, for example, with the banks and all of that. In the same way, so we've spoken about literacy and then infrastructure. So this has to be done. Businesses that run on digital services, they have to speak up a whole lot and also by themselves invest in infrastructural development along these areas. Research, there are better ways to work on these things. They have to research and deploy those services. Those in the rural areas, for instance, you can educate them a whole lot on how to, for example, maybe given our situation, on how to easily use the USSD that doesn't require internet services, for example, and on how to protect their information, their PIN, personal identification numbers with regards to all this thing. Educate them, provide this infrastructure, make it easily accessible. And then for those in the urban areas, let the internet services work properly. There has to be collaborations in this regard. The big businesses that run on this platform need to collaborate with the data service providers, that is the internet service providers, and the regulators themselves. In Nigeria, the NCC, the NCC and other regulatory bodies. Of course, we've spoken to, by the time these two things are actually done, it will help, it will help it will help people to easily make use of this infrastructure, the blockchain, the ZKPs, and all of that. And then some of these things can also be deployed into, to other industries. When we talk of adopting these in various other businesses. In Nigeria today, most people know digital services to only work in few industries, like the financial institutions mainly. But then digital services can work in various blockchains, and all of these things can work in various other services. For example, in the educational system, in the health industry, a lot of medical records are out there. If you go to a regular public hospital, you may find out that it will be easy to access people's personal data, their health records, and all of that. There has to be a way that blockchain and some other things can be deployed. Some of these other tools that we've made mention of can be deployed in the health industry so as to protect people's data. A lot of people come to online or on social media and all of that, and they begin to see some of their records that they have, in terms of based on trust given to the professional that is hand treating them. People will see their records that they believe should be kept, even though they have dealt with a public institution. But the engagement doesn't mean that the information they have released, maybe they've they've gone to a public health facility, as it were, even though it's a public health facility, but the information they've given to that public institution doesn't mean that their information has now become public. For example, when you're dealing with the company house here in Nigeria, the Corporate Affairs Commission, there are some information you give them that they won't make open to the public. For example, they can only make it open to some other regulatory bodies where it becomes necessary and all of that. So these things can also be deployed to the health system, to the educational system, to various other industries. I've already spoken to issues of collaboration and partnership with big organizations. So these are the things that when they are properly done, there will be, the trust level will increase highly, and a whole lot of people that have before now been excluded from data privacy activities can now be further included, because once there is a breach at one end, the likelihood that that breach will continue and affect others is there. So fostering inclusion can be highly achieved if some of these things we have made reference to, transparency, ethical practices, are all well adopted. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Izuchukwu. Thank you so much, Kofo, for a wonderful session. We're coming to the end of the session, and so I'll just quickly like to ask if there's any part of our conversation today that any of you would like to highlight before we round up.
Okay, if I'm going to speak with regards to auditing, which Kofo has also spoken well about. So with regards to the audit process, so I had already made mention of it, that the audit process, some of the things required there has to do with transparency, ensuring security, regularly updating the data and ensuring accuracy. So all of these things, when an organization carries out some of these things through their DPOs, for example, there is also need for a third eye to take a look at it, at those outside the organization itself. And that is exactly where the role of a DPCO, that is Data Protection Compliance Officer, comes in. A DPCO would be able to take another look at the processes and the procedures of an organization, and will be able to pick out some missing areas and some areas that can actually be improved upon. And so, as experts as they are, so this is just to encourage organizations. When we speak about data privacy or data protection audit and all of that. The end game is not just to find faults with people, with organizations that are not doing it. As a matter of fact, the law enabling the NDPC to enforce the regulations around data protection, there are a lot of sanctions and penalties that NDPC itself has actually not started implementing because it doesn't want to show itself as a police, to be policing. It just wants to see itself as as a partner in ensuring that people's data are well protected. Because the essence of this whole thing we've discussed is to ensure, from the beginning we've mentioned, to ensure that identity theft is eradicated or reduced to the lowest minimum, because it causes a whole lot of issue. There are a whole lot of innocent persons that are behind bars today because their identity have been stolen and used to commit crime. So if these practices are adhered to, those persons would have not become victims as they are today. So these are part of the things that are being ensured. People keep when they give road safety, their data and all of those things, or VIO, their data. How do you ensure that these data are well handled, that someone doesn't randomly walk into any of these offices, or maybe the bad eggs among our organizations, our agencies, the government agencies doesn't go and use this information and commit one crime one way or the other, and then the innocent Nigerian is victimized and all of that. So it ensures that identity theft is eradicated or reduced to the barest minimum. Commission of cyber frauds and crimes and all of that will also be dealt with. So the audit process will help to ensure that some of these things are noted, pointed out. So the list goes on and on. When you go to put your name down at the security point, maybe you're entering into an organization and you are required to put down your details, phone number, and all of those things, your address. Organizations are supposed to be trained on how this information can be collected without exposing those details to another person that will come to put their own names down. Because I can go to write a name down and then I'm seeing the other names before me, phone numbers and all of that, people that would ordinarily not have wanted to give out their details. It will be out there. So how do organizations ensure that this information are not taken unauthorized by whoever that has provided it? So these are the things that audit processes will help ensure and also implemented. So being Data Privacy Week, I want to wish everyone that must have listened to us, organizations alike and data subjects, that they should be on the watch out on how to protect their personal data and help others to also protect theirs. Thank you so much, Precious.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Izu. Thank you, Kofo, once again for taking out time of your busy schedule to discuss with us today. We are glad to have been able to receive from your wealth of knowledge on today's matter of discussion. And we would also like to say a very big thank you to our listeners for tuning in. As always, the conversation continues on our social media handles. Please do remember to send us your comments and your thoughts on today's episode. Thank you once again.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by DealHQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.